Tonight, we are going to wander through the places where America's memory fades. Ancient cities hidden beneath desert skies, giant shapes carved into the earth, footprints that rewrite history, and disappearances that still have no explanation. So settle in, and let us step into the forgotten side of the country together. Long before Las Vegas lit up the desert skies, and before highways cut across the American Southwest, there were already cities here, places built from stone, aligned with the movement of the sun, connected by roads that crossed empty landscapes for miles into nowhere. Today, much of that world has faded back into dust. But if you fly over the deserts of New Mexico or Arizona at the right time of day, strange shapes still emerge from the earth. Giant circles, broken walls, staircases leading into cliffs, and abandoned settlements sitting silently beneath endless red rock horizons. The American desert often feels empty to modern travelers, yet archaeologists now believe some of these regions once supported surprisingly large and complex populations. The deeper researchers look into these forgotten cities, the stranger the story becomes. One of the most mysterious places is Chaco Canyon, hidden deep within the high desert of northwestern New Mexico. At first glance, the canyon does not seem capable of supporting a major civilization. Rainfall is low, summers are brutally hot, winters can become freezing, and reliable farming is difficult, even with modern technology. Yet around 1,000 years ago, people here constructed enormous stone buildings that still dominate the landscape today. Some of these structures, often called great houses, contained hundreds of rooms spread across multiple floors. Pueblo Bonito, the most famous among them, may have stood 4 or even 5 stories high in certain sections. In the middle of an isolated desert canyon long before European contact, people were hauling massive wooden beams across distances that sometimes exceeded 50 meters. That detail alone continues to puzzle researchers. The canyon itself contains very few large trees. Studies suggest many beams came from distant mountain forests, meaning thousands of logs had to be transported by human labor through rough terrain, without horses, wagons, or metal tools. Even today, carrying a single heavy timber across desert land under intense sun would be exhausting. Yet, Chaco's builders repeated this process for generations. The scale of labor hints that Chaco Canyon may have been far more influential than people once believed. At night, the canyon becomes unnervingly quiet. Wind moves through the rock walls, while the stars above appear unusually sharp in the dry desert air. It is not difficult to understand why many archaeologists think astronomy played an important role here. Several buildings align closely with solar and lunar cycles. Windows and doorways appear positioned to capture light during solstices. Nearby rock carvings may track lunar patterns that repeat only every 18 years. Whether these alignments served practical, ceremonial, or symbolic purposes is still debated, but they suggest the people of Chaco were observing the sky with extraordinary attention. What makes the mystery deeper is that Chaco Canyon was not isolated. Roads extended outward from the canyon in remarkably straight lines, cutting across cliffs, mesas, and difficult terrain. Some stretched for dozens of miles. From above, certain roads almost resemble engineered highways rather than simple walking trails. Archaeologists still argue over their exact purpose. Some believe they connected trade networks across the Southwest. Others suspect certain routes had ceremonial meaning instead of practical transportation use. In some places, staircases were carved directly into cliffs, suggesting these paths were important enough to justify immense labor. And then there is the question that never fully disappears. Why build such a massive center in such an unforgiving place at all? For decades, many theories focused heavily on religion. Chaco may have functioned less like a traditional city and more like a ceremonial hub that drew people from surrounding regions during important seasonal gatherings. Evidence of exotic goods supports the idea that Chaco was deeply connected to distant cultures. Archaeologists have uncovered shells from the Pacific coast, tropical bird remains likely connected to macaw from Mesoamerica, and traces of cacao, a substance associated with elite ritual drinking, far to the south in ancient Central America. These discoveries changed how historians viewed the ancient Southwest. Instead of isolated desert settlements, the region may once have been part of an enormous network of exchange and communication, stretching across vast distances. Yet, despite all this complexity, Chaco Canyon eventually declined. By the late 1100s and early 1200s, large-scale construction slowed dramatically. Populations appear to have dispersed into other areas. One leading explanation involves climate change. Tree ring studies indicate the Southwest experienced prolonged drought during this period, possibly placing unbearable pressure on farming systems already pushed close to environmental limits. Water became less predictable. Crops may have failed repeatedly. A society dependent on coordination and resource distribution could have fractured under those conditions. But drought alone may not explain everything. Evidence suggests signs of social stress were already emerging. Some settlements became more defensive. Construction patterns changed in certain locations across the Southwest. Archaeologists discovered signs of violence and burned structures. Human societies rarely collapse because of a single cause. Environment pressure, political instability, religious shifts, migration, and competition for resources may have combined slowly over generations until the old system could no longer hold together. Farther west, another mystery rises directly from the cliffs of Mesa Verde in present-day Colorado. Unlike Chaco Canyon's massive open complexes, Mesa Verde's most famous settlements were built into aloves, carved naturally into canyon walls. Cliff Palace, perhaps the best known, almost looks unreal from a distance. A stone city, hidden beneath overhanging rock, protected from wind and heat by the canyon itself. Hundreds of rooms and ceremonial spaces were carefully fitted into the cliffside, creating one of the most visually striking archaeological sites in North America. The location immediately raises questions. Why move entire communities into cliffs? Protection may have played a role. Elevated settlements are easier to defend. The aloves also provide shade and natural insulation against extreme temperatures. But the move into cliff dwellings seems to have occurred relatively late in the region's history, suggesting something changed in the surrounding world. Increasing conflict is one possibility. Environmental instability is another. What is remarkable is how quickly these places were eventually abandoned. By the late 1200s, many major cliff settlements stood empty. The descendants of these communities did not vanish, despite older myths claiming entire civilizations mysteriously disappeared. Modern Pueblo peoples maintain deep cultural connections to these ancient sites. From a scientific perspective, the story is less about extinction and more about migration, adaptation, and survival under difficult conditions. Still, for outsiders arriving centuries later, the empty stone cities must have felt deeply unsettling. Early American settlers and explorers often misunderstood these ruins completely. Some refuse to believe indigenous peoples could have constructed such sophisticated architecture. Strange theories emerged, claiming lost European travelers, ancient Israelites, or even mythical vanished races built the cities instead. Today, archaeologists reject those ideas entirely, but their existence reveals something important about human psychology. People are often more comfortable inventing elaborate myths than accepting that advanced societies flourished in places they assumed were empty wilderness. The desert itself encourages that kind of imagination. In the southwest, distances distort perception. Heat waves shimmer across the horizon. Entire settlements disappear into rock formations until sunlight hits at a certain angle. Even now, satellite technology continues identifying ancient roads, canals, and structures hidden beneath sand and vegetation. Researchers using LiDAR scanning have begun uncovering patterns invisible from ground level. Each new discovery quietly changes the scale of what historians thought ancient North America looked like. What may be most fascinating is that these forgotten cities were not failures in the simple sense modern people often imagine. Many survived for centuries in environments where maintaining large populations required deep knowledge of water, seasons, agriculture, and cooperation. Their builders understood the desert intimately. Reservoir systems, irrigation methods, seasonal planning, and architectural design all reflected generations of adaptation. In some ways, the real mystery is not why these societies collapsed, but how long they endured in landscapes so difficult to master. There is also something strangely modern about their story. Cities rising in harsh climates, dependent on fragile systems of water and trade, can feel surprisingly familiar in the American Southwest today. Places like Phoenix and Las Vegas exist because of vast infrastructure networks redirecting water across deserts that naturally support far fewer people. Ancient Chacoans could not pump rivers across hundreds of miles with electricity, but they faced many of the same fundamental questions. How much growth can an arid landscape truly sustain, and what happens when environmental stability begins to fail? Perhaps that is part of why these ruins continue to fascinate Americans. They do not feel entirely disconnected from the present. Standing among collapsed stone walls beneath enormous desert skies, it becomes difficult not to think about time differently. Entire societies once gathered here, built roads, traded goods across continents, tracked the stars, raised families, solved engineering problems, argued over power, survived droughts, and eventually moved on. For centuries afterward, wind and sand slowly reclaimed their cities until much of the modern world forgot they were ever there at all. And even now, the story remains incomplete. New excavations continue, revealing hidden structures beneath the desert floor. Tree ring data refines timelines. DNA studies reshape migration theories. Archaeologists debate how centralized Chaco society really was and how far its influence extended. Some researchers argue these cities functioned as political capitals. Others see ceremonial gathering centers connected by culture rather than direct control. The evidence still leaves room for interpretation. That uncertainty may be exactly what keeps the mystery alive. The deserts of the American Southwest are filled with places where silence seems heavier than it should be. Where broken walls sit beneath the same stars ancient builders once studied 1,000 years ago. And somewhere beneath the sand, there are likely still roads, homes, ceremonial chambers, and entire chapters of forgotten history waiting to emerge again into the light. Across the forests, river valleys, and open plains of North America, there are giant shapes, hidden beneath the grass, that most people drive past without ever noticing. Some rise, like smooth green hills above the landscape. Others stretch outward in strange patterns, only fully visible from the sky. At first glance, they seem natural, almost invisible against the earth itself. But these formations were built by human hands, centuries, and in some cases, thousands of years, before the United States existed. Long before modern cities covered the continent, ancient societies across North America were already moving astonishing amounts of soil to create ceremonial centers, burial complexes, geometric platforms, and massive symbolic designs that still survive today. What makes these earthworks so mysterious is not just their scale, but how completely they vanished from mainstream memory. One of the most extraordinary examples once stood near the Mississippi River in present-day Illinois. Today, the area sits quietly across from St. Louis, surrounded by highways, neighborhoods, and industrial development. But around the year 1050, this place may have been the largest city north of Mexico. Archaeologists call it Cahokia. At its peak, some estimates suggest its population rivaled or exceeded many major European cities of the same era. Tens of thousands of people may have lived within and around the settlement, supported by agriculture, trade, engineering, and organized labor on a scale few Americans associate with pre-Columbian North America. The center of Cahokia was dominated by enormous urn structures. The largest, now called Monk's Mound, still towers above the landscape. Even after centuries of erosion, it remains the biggest prehistoric urn construction in the Americas. Its base covers more ground than many pyramids. To build it, workers carried basket after basket of dirt by hand, slowly reshaping the land over generations. Standing at the top today, you can see how carefully the city was planned. Large plazas spread outward below. Other mounds once surrounded the central area in deliberate arrangements tied to politics, ceremony, and astronomy. What becomes increasingly unsettling is how little survives compared to what once existed. Early American expansion destroyed countless mounds across the Midwest and Southeast. Entire earthwork complexes were flattened for farmland, roads, and construction before archaeologists could properly study them. Some disappeared before photography even existed. 19th-century settlers often treated the mounds as obstacles rather than historical treasures. In some cases, earth from ancient sites was literally shoveled away for building material. By the time serious preservation efforts began, huge portions of North America's prehistoric landscape had already been erased. That disappearance helped fuel centuries of speculation. Many early Europeans refused to believe indigenous societies had constructed such large and organized earthworks. Instead, they invented elaborate theories involving lost civilizations, wandering Egyptians, Vikings, or mythical vanished races. These ideas spread widely during the 1800s, partly because acknowledging the sophistication of native cultures conflicted with the political narratives of westward expansion. Modern archaeology has completely rejected those theories. The builders of the mounds were ancestors of indigenous peoples across the continent. Yet the persistence of the old myths reveals how surprising these ancient cities seemed even to the people who encountered them directly. Far from Cahokia, another earthwork continues to puzzle researchers for different reasons. In rural Ohio, stretched across a plateau above Brush Creek, lies the Serpent Mound. From ground level, its shape is difficult to understand, but from above, the design becomes unmistakable. A giant serpent, more than a quarter-mile long, twisting across the landscape with coils that lead toward an oval-shaped form near its mouth. The mound does not appear defensive or residential. It seems symbolic, almost entirely ceremonial in purpose. No one knows exactly why it was built. Some researchers connect the serpent shape to spiritual traditions involving sky beings, underworld powers, or cycles of death and rebirth found in various native belief systems. Others focus on astronomy. Certain parts of the mound appear aligned with solstice sunsets and lunar events. During the summer solstice, the serpent's head roughly points toward the setting sun. Whether this alignment was intentional remains debated, but similar astronomical relationships appear repeatedly across ancient North American earthworks. The timing of the mound's construction is also still discussed. Different dating methods have produced competing interpretations, with some evidence pointing toward the Adena culture over 2,000 years ago, while other studies suggest later fort ancient peoples may have rebuilt or modified the site centuries afterward. That uncertainty only deepens the mystery. Serpent Mound may not represent a single moment in history, but a sacred place reused and reshaped across generations. And then there is the psychological effect of the mound itself. Unlike stone ruins rising dramatically from deserts or jungles, earthworks almost hide from the modern world. Grass grows over them, trees surround them, rain slowly softens their edges. They blend back into nature so completely that entire civilizations can disappear in plain sight. In many places across the eastern United States, ancient mounds survive quietly inside forests, parks, golf courses, suburban developments, or empty fields where few people realize what lies beneath their feet. The societies that built these structures were not small, isolated tribes struggling at the edge of survival. Archaeological evidence reveals extensive trade networks stretching across enormous distances. Copper from the Great Lakes traveled south. Shells from the Gulf Coast moved inland. Obsidian, mica, carved stone pipes, pottery, and ceremonial goods circulated between regions separated by hundreds of miles. Long before railroads or paved roads existed, information and material were already flowing through North America, along river systems and overland routes connecting different cultures together. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Moundbu cultures is how diverse they were across time. The term mound builders actually covers many separate societies spanning thousands of years, rather than a single civilization. Some groups built burial mounds. Others constructed platform mounds supporting temples or elite residences. Some created geometric earthworks shaped like circles, squares, and octagons, so large they can only fully be appreciated from the air. The Hopewell culture in particular produced astonishing geometric complexes across Ohio that still confuse researchers today because of their precision and scale. At Newark, Ohio, massive earthen walls once formed enormous connected circles and octagons across the landscape. Modern studies suggest certain alignments correspond closely to lunar cycles, so particularly the moon's maximum rising and setting positions over an 18-6-year period. That level of astronomical observation required generations of careful tracking. It suggests these societies were not simply building monuments randomly, but embedding sophisticated cosmological ideas directly into the landscape itself. What remains uncertain is how centralized these societies truly were. Did powerful rulers command huge labor forces? Or were the earthworks collective ceremonial projects tied to seasonal gatherings and shared religious traditions? Archaeologists continue debating how authority functioned in these ancient cultures. Some evidence suggests hierarchical leadership structures. Other evidence points toward looser, regional networks, united by ritual and exchange, rather than strict political control. The rise and decline of Cahokia remains especially mysterious because of how rapidly change seems to have occurred. Around the 1200s and 1300s, population levels dropped significantly. Construction slowed. Certain neighborhoods were abandoned. Evidence of social tension appears in some areas, including defensive palisades surrounding parts of the city. Climate shifts may have affected agriculture along the Mississippi floodplain. Deforestation from rapid urban growth could have strained resources. Political instability or changing belief systems may also have played a role. There are even signs that Cahokia experienced episodes of violence and internal unrest. Excavations uncovered mass burials, raising difficult questions about sacrifice, social hierarchy, and power. Some archaeologists argue these discoveries point toward increasingly rigid elite control during periods of instability. Others caution against over-interpreting evidence that remains incomplete. The reality is that large ancient cities were complicated places shaped by the same pressures that affect urban societies throughout history: food supply, climate, labor, belief, trade, conflict, and leadership. Perhaps the strangest part of the story is how invisible all of this became in modern American consciousness. School textbooks often focus heavily on civilizations in Egypt, Rome, Greece, or Mesoamerica, while the monumental societies of North America receive comparatively little attention. Yet for thousands of years, people here were engineering landscapes on a continental scale, mapping celestial cycles into earthworks, organizing long-distance trade systems, and building cities capable of supporting enormous populations. In some ways, the mounds challenge modern assumptions about what ancient North America was supposed to look like. Popular imagination often pictures endless untouched wilderness before European arrival, but archaeology reveals landscapes already shaped by human activity for centuries. Forests managed intentionally, river valleys cultivated, trade routes established, ceremonial centers maintained, and large populations moving across interconnected regions. Even now, discoveries continue reshaping the timeline. Advanced imaging technologies occasionally reveal hidden earthworks beneath forests or farmland. Ground-penetrating radar uncovers structures invisible at the surface. Archaeologists are increasingly realizing how much may still remain buried or destroyed beyond recovery. Entire chapters of history may have vanished before anyone understood what was being lost. And maybe that is what gives these earthworks their unusual emotional weight. Unlike abandoned castles or stone temples, the mounds feel quieter, almost reluctant to reveal themselves. They rise gently from the land rather than dominating it. Centuries of rain and grass soften their outlines until history becomes difficult to separate from nature itself. Yet beneath those hills lie traces of enormous human effort, memory, ceremony, ambition, fear, and belief. At sunset, places like Cahokia or Serpent Mound become strangely still. Shadows stretch across the earthworks, while birds move over landscapes shaped long before modern borders existed, and it becomes easier to imagine how many stories disappeared here. Entire systems of knowledge, traditions, ceremonies, political struggles, and ways of seeing the universe that survived for generations before slowly fading into silence beneath the grass of North America. In the middle of the New Mexico desert, where the wind moves across white gypsum dunes that look almost like frozen ocean waves. Archaeologists uncovered something that immediately created one of the biggest debates in American history. At first, the marks seemed ordinary, just tracks pressed into ancient mud, thousands of years waste, beside the footprints of giant Ice Age animals. But as researchers studied them more carefully, a disturbing possibility began to emerge. Some of the human footprints appeared to be far older than they should have been. Much older, old enough to challenge one of the most widely accepted stories about how humans first entered the Americas. For generations, textbooks taught that the earliest people arrived near the end of the Ice Age, roughly 13,000 years ago, likely traveling from Siberia into Alaska across a land bridge exposed by lower sea levels. This idea became deeply rooted in archaeology for decades, but the footprints at White Sands National Park hinted at something far more complicated. According to several dating studies, some tracks may be between 21,000 and 23,000 years old, placing humans in North America during a period when massive ice sheets still covered huge parts of the continent. If accurate, it would mean people reached the Americas far earlier than many scientists once believed possible. The discovery immediately triggered both excitement and skepticism because the implications were enormous. The footprints themselves are haunting to imagine. They were left behind in wet ground near the edge of an ancient lake during the last ice age. Over time, sediment buried them, preserving moments of movement that survived for tens of thousands of years beneath the desert floor. Some tracks appear to belong to children. Others suggest adults carrying heavy loads. In certain areas, human prints overlap with those of extinct animals like mammoths and giant ground sloths. One famous sequence seems to show a sloth rearing upward after encountering human tracks nearby, almost as if the animal noticed danger. It feels less like archaeology and more like a scene frozen in time. What makes the site so powerful is the directness of the evidence. Stone tools can be moved, bones can be disturbed, campsites can be debated, but footprints are intensely personal. They capture motion itself. Someone walked there. Someone crossed wet ground under an Ice Age sky, while enormous animals still roamed North America. And yet, the dating became controversial almost immediately. Some researchers questioned whether the ancient seeds used to determine the age of the sediment might have absorbed older carbon from the water, potentially distorting results. Others argued the evidence was strong and consistent across multiple layers. Additional studies later appeared to support the older timeline, but the debate remains active because archaeology rarely changes overnight. Scientific consensus moves slowly, especially when discoveries threaten long-standing models. The deeper issue behind the argument is not simply about numbers. It is about how humans could have entered the Americas so early at all. During the height of the Ice Age, giant ice sheets covered much of Canada, potentially blocking the inland migration routes traditionally associated with early settlement. If people were already present farther south before the ice corridors opened, then they may have traveled along Pacific coastlines by boat much earlier than once assumed. That possibility changes the image many people hold of prehistoric migration entirely. Instead of small groups slowly walking through an open corridor after the glaciers retreated, humans may have already been exploring coastlines, adapting to marine environments, and moving across continents while much of North America was still locked in ice. The challenge is that coastlines from that era are now underwater because sea levels rose dramatically after the Ice Age ended. If ancient camps once existed along those shores, Many may now lie submerged beneath the Pacific Ocean. That creates one of archaeology's most frustrating problems. Some of the best evidence may simply no longer be accessible. White Sands is not the only site causing historians to reconsider the timeline. In Texas, archaeologists excavating at the Deborah L. Friedkin site uncovered stone tools beneath layers associated with the Clovis culture, which was long considered the earliest widespread culture in North America. The deeper tools appeared older, possibly around 15,000 to 16,000 years old or more. In Oregon, preserved human feces discovered in ancient caves contained DNA, suggesting humans were present earlier than once thought. In Chile, far south in South America, the Monte Verde site provided strong evidence of human occupation dating back at least 14,500 years ago, which alone complicated older migration models because reaching southern Chile would have required humans to move through the Americas earlier than the classic timeline allowed. Gradually, the picture began shifting. Instead of one single migration event involving one culture, researchers now suspect the peopling of the Americas may have involved multiple waves, multiple routes, and far greater complexity than older theories suggested. But uncertainty still surrounds many details. Archaeology is filled with sites that appear promising at first and later collapse under scrutiny. Extraordinary claims require extremely careful evidence, because once a theory enters public imagination, it becomes difficult to separate science from speculation. That tension creates an unusual atmosphere around these discoveries. Every footprint, every tool fragment, every buried campfire has the potential to reshape history. Yet, every claim must survive years of criticism before acceptance grows. Some of the strangest discoveries are not even fully accepted today. Across North America, there have been controversial reports of ancient tools or possible human activity associated with extinct Ice Age animals in ways that challenge existing timelines. In some cases, archaeologists remain deeply divided over whether markings on bones were made by humans or natural processes. Tiny differences in interpretation can completely change the meaning of a site. A cracked stone might be an ancient tool or simply a rock broken by geology. A cut mark on bone might come from human activity or animal scavenging. The farther back researchers push the timeline, the harder certainty becomes, because evidence grows increasingly fragile. And then there are discoveries that became famous largely because they were misunderstood. For decades, stories circulated about impossible footprints, supposedly proving humans walked beside dinosaurs or existed millions of years earlier than science allows. Most of these claims were eventually debunked, often involving eroded rock formations, misidentified tracks, or deliberate hoaxes. Yet people remain fascinated by them because footprints feel emotionally powerful in a way fossils sometimes do not. A footprint feels immediate. It carries personality. It suggests presence. You can almost imagine the person who made it. That emotional reaction explains why ancient human tracks continue capturing public imagination. Even when the science surrounding them becomes technical and uncertain, some archaeologists believe the growing evidence for earlier migration should not surprise us at all. Humans are highly adaptable explorers. Once people developed even simple coastal technologies, shorelines would have provided rich food sources and relatively efficient travel routes. Over thousands of years, small groups could have expanded gradually into entirely new environments. Others remain cautious, arguing that pushing dates too aggressively risks weakening scientific standards. The debate is not simply academic. It reflects deeper questions about how knowledge changes. For much of the 20th century, the Clovis first model dominated American archaeology so completely that contradictory evidence was often dismissed automatically. Younger researchers later argued the field became too attached to a single explanation. As new discoveries accumulated, resistance slowly weakened. That process reveals something fascinating about science itself. Even evidence-based disciplines can become shaped by tradition, professional reputation, and human psychology. In many ways, the footprints at White Sands became symbolic, not just because of their age, but because they forced researchers to confront how incomplete historical narratives can be. There is also something unsettling about realizing how little physical evidence survives. From most human lives, entire generations crossed continents, raised children, hunted animals, adapted to unfamiliar climates, and disappeared with almost no trace. A few footprints pressed into mud survived by pure accident. If conditions had changed slightly, rain or erosion might have erased them forever. The history of the first Americans may depend partly on rare moments where geology happened to preserve fragile evidence long enough for modern humans to rediscover it. And perhaps that is what makes these ancient tracks so mesmerizing. They transform prehistory from abstraction into something deeply human. Somewhere in the distance of unimaginable time, people walked across wet ground, carrying children, searching for food, moving through landscapes filled with giant animals that no longer exist. They could not possibly imagine that tens of thousands of years later, another civilization would stare at the impressions of their feet and argue over what those steps meant. Even now, new discoveries continue emerging from caves, riverbanks, deserts, and submerged coastlines across the Americas. Every excavation carries the possibility of rewriting part of the story again. The timeline may shift further. Migration routes may become more complex. Entire assumptions may eventually disappear. But beneath all the scientific debate remains a quieter realization. The first Americans were likely far more ancient, adaptable, and mysterious than earlier generations ever imagined. And somewhere beneath the landscapes of North America, there are probably still footprints waiting to be found that could change the story once again. Far out in the deserts of the American Southwest, there are shapes carved into the earth, so enormous that for centuries almost nobody noticed they existed. From ground level, the landscape appears empty. Endless rock, heat waves trembling across the horizon, dry wind moving through silence that feels ancient. But from the sky, strange figures begin to emerge. Giant human forms, animals stretched across the desert floor, perfectly straight lines cutting through barren land for distances that seem unnatural. Some of these designs are hundreds of feet long, created long before airplanes, satellites, or modern surveying equipment existed. And what makes them especially mysterious is that many appear designed to be fully understood only from above. In California, near the Colorado River, one of the most famous examples lies hidden within the desert near Blay. The Blay intaglios are enormous geoglyphs, giant figures created by scraping away dark surface rocks to reveal lighter soil underneath. Some depict human-like shapes with long limbs spread across the earth. Others resemble animals or abstract forms whose meanings remain uncertain. Standing beside them on the ground does not immediately reveal their scale. The lines feel almost random up close. Only from elevated viewpoints does the full image become visible, and that realization creates an immediate question that has fascinated researchers for decades. Why would ancient people create art they could barely see themselves? The answer may lie partly in how these societies understood the landscape itself. To modernize, deserts often seem empty, but for ancient cultures, they were alive with spiritual meaning, movement, memory, and celestial patterns. A figure carved into the earth may not have been intended for ordinary human viewing at all. Some archaeologists believe these geoglyphs functioned as ceremonial pathways, sacred markers, or messages connected to spiritual beings associated with the sky. Others suggest they may have marked important travel routes or gathering sites near water sources. The problem is that direct evidence remains extremely limited because the creators left no written explanations behind. In the absence of texts, interpretation becomes a careful balance between archaeology, indigenous oral traditions, environmental analysis, and educated speculation. The desert itself helped preserve these massive designs. In many regions of the southwest, rainfall is so rare and erosion so slow that markings can survive for centuries or even millennia with surprisingly little disturbance. Some geoglyphs remained untouched simply because the surrounding land was remote and difficult to access. Others were nearly destroyed by roads, vehicles, military activity, or development before their significance became widely recognized. What is unsettling is how many may already have vanished completely before anyone documented them. Across North America, ancient earthworks and surface designs were likely far more common than modern people realize. Many may now lie beneath cities, highways, or farmland, erased before archaeologists understood what they were looking at. One reason these giant figures feel so mysterious is because they challenge assumptions about ancient North America. Popular imagination often associates monumental landscape designs with places like Peru's Nazca lines, not the United States. Yet, indigenous societies across the Southwest and beyond were shaping entire landscapes long before European arrival. Some desert geoglyphs stretch across areas larger than football fields. Others align with hills, river valleys, or astronomical events in ways researchers are still studying today. And unlike massive stone monuments, these designs were intentionally subtle. They blend into the earth itself, becoming visible only under certain conditions of light, shadow, and elevation. There is something strangely cinematic about the way they reveal themselves. Flying over desert terrain at sunrise or sunset, enormous hidden shapes suddenly appear beneath the wings of an aircraft, like forgotten symbols resurfacing from another world. Some researchers think the process of creating the geoglyphs may have been just as important as the finished images. Building giant earth designs in harsh desert environments would have required coordination, labor, and planning. Groups of people had to clear rocks carefully across large areas while maintaining recognizable proportions. Certain figures remain impressively symmetrical despite their scale. This suggests intentional design rather than random marking. Yet unlike cities or defensive walls, these creations served no obvious survival purpose. They consumed energy and time purely for symbolic, ceremonial, or cultural reasons. That fact alone says something important about the societies that made them. Human beings have always reshaped landscapes not only for survival, but to express meaning, identity, memory, and belief. In Arizona, another set of mysterious markings, known as the Topac Maze, consists of winding, stone pathways etched across the desert floor. Early settlers sometimes assumed these patterns were literal mazes or puzzles. but many archaeologists now believe they may have held ceremonial significance tied to spiritual journeys or cosmological ideas. Similar designs appear in indigenous traditions, where movement itself carries ritual meaning. Walking a path through the landscape could symbolize transformation, death, rebirth, or connection to sacred forces. Modern observers often search for hidden technological explanations because the scale of these sites feels difficult to comprehend. But ancient societies did not need advanced machinery to create enormous works over long periods of time. Patience, labor, and collective purpose can reshape landscapes surprisingly effectively. The mystery deepens when considering how these geoglyphs fit into larger regional networks. The Southwest was not isolated. Trade routes connected communities across deserts, mountains, and river valleys for centuries. Shells, pigments, pottery, copper, and ceremonial goods moved across enormous distances. Information traveled too. Artistic styles, religious symbols, and architectural ideas spread between cultures in ways archaeologists are still reconstructing today. Some geoglyphs may have functioned as territorial markers, visible from nearby hills or mountains. Others may have been tied to seasonal gatherings or ceremonies linked to the movement of the sun and stars. There is also the possibility that some meanings have been permanently lost. Human cultures constantly change. Sacred traditions evolve, merge, disappear, or transform across generations. Even within living societies, rituals can lose original meanings over time. Trying to fully decode symbols created centuries ago without written records may be impossible in certain cases. Archaeologists can study patterns, alignments, materials, and cultural context, but interpretation always contains uncertainty. That uncertainty often invites sensational theories. Over the years, some people claimed that giant desert figures must have been made for aliens because they appear best viewed from above. Others suggested lost civilizations with forgotten technology created them. These explanations became popular largely because they sound dramatic, but there is no credible scientific evidence supporting them. The real story is more grounded and in many ways more impressive. Ancient indigenous societies possessed deep environmental knowledge, mathematical awareness, organizational ability, and spiritual traditions sophisticated enough to produce large-scale landscape art without needing supernatural intervention. The temptation to attribute ancient achievements to mysterious outsiders often says more about modern assumptions than about the past itself. Perhaps the strangest part is how invisible many of these sites remained for so long. Early pilots, flying across the Southwest, occasionally spotted unusual markings below, but serious archaeological study often came much later. Some geoglyphs became damaged before anyone realized their age or importance. Off-road vehicles cut through ancient lines. Construction projects erased sections permanently. In a harsh irony, some of these massive works survived centuries of desert weather, only to face destruction within decades of modern expansion. Even today, researchers suspect undiscovered geoglyphs may still exist in remote areas, difficult to survey thoroughly. New aerial imaging technologies continue revealing patterns invisible from the ground. Drones, satellite analysis, and LAR scanning are gradually changing how archaeologists study landscapes across North America. What once looked like empty desert increasingly appears layered with traces of forgotten human activity. There is also something psychologically powerful about giant images hidden within natural environments. Humans are naturally drawn toward patterns and symbols. Seeing enormous figures emerge from barren landscapes creates an emotional reaction, difficult to explain rationally. The desert amplifies that feeling because of its scale and silence. Under intense sun and endless open sky, even small human constructions can feel strangely monumental. A giant figure, scraped into the earth thousands of years ago, begins to seem less like archaeology and more like communication across time itself. And perhaps that is part of why these places continue to fascinate people. They remind us that ancient North America was not an untouched wilderness waiting for history to begin. It was already filled with cultures shaping land, tracking celestial cycles, building ceremonial spaces, creating symbolic art, and embedding meaning directly into the environment around them. The giant lines across the desert were not random marks. They were intentional acts of memory and identity placed into landscapes that ancient people understood intimately. Somewhere beneath the silence of the Southwest, there are likely still figures hidden beneath dust and stone, waiting for the right angle of sunlight to reveal them again. Along the cold northern shores of Lake Superior, hidden beneath forests, swamps, and layers of abandoned rock, there are thousands of ancient mining pits that should not exist on the scale they do. Many are small and easy to miss, half filled with leaves and rainwater after centuries of erosion. Others cut deep into the earth, like scars left behind by a forgotten industry. At first glance, the region feels isolated and harsh even today. Endless pine forests, freezing winters, rocky coastlines battered by storms coming across the largest freshwater lake on Earth. Yet thousands of years ago, long before iron railroads, blast furnaces, or modern machinery arrived in North America, people here were already extracting enormous quantities of copper from the ground. The deeper archaeologists studied the region, the stranger the story became. In places across Michigan's Upper Peninsula and nearby Isle Royale, researchers discovered evidence of prehistoric mining activity stretching back more than 7,000 years. Ancient miners dug trenches into exposed copper veins, using stone hammers, fire, wooden tools, and sheer human labor. Some of the hammerstones found at these sites weigh more than 20 pounds. Others show signs of repeated impact against hard rock surfaces over long periods of time. What shocked early investigators was not simply the existence of ancient mining, but the scale of it. Tens of thousands of pits and extraction areas have been documented around Lake Superior. In some locations, entire landscapes were reshaped by prehistoric excavation. And unlike many ancient metals that required complex smelting, the copper here often existed in nearly pure form, exposed naturally within rock formations left behind by ancient volcanic activity. This native copper could be hammered directly into tools, blades, fishhooks, spear points, ornaments, and ceremonial objects without needing advanced metallurgy. That accessibility may explain why the region became one of the earliest centers of copper use in North America. But it also raises a larger mystery. Where did all the copper go? Archaeologists know copper artifacts spread far beyond the Great Lakes region. Objects made from Lake Superior copper have been found across vast areas of North America, reaching deep into the Midwest and beyond. Ancient trade networks carried materials over astonishing distances long before horses or wheeled transport existed. Rivers functioned like highways through forests and plains, connecting societies separated by hundreds of miles. Copper became part of an enormous exchange system involving shells, obsidian, stone tools, pigments, and ceremonial goods moving between cultures across the continent. Yet, some researchers have argued that the amount of copper removed from the Lake Superior region appears unusually large compared to the number of surviving artifacts discovered so far. This imbalance fueled decades of speculation. During the 19th and early 20th centuries, exaggerated theories began circulating that ancient miners may have extracted massive quantities of copper for some lost transatlantic trade network involving Europe or the Mediterranean world. Some even claimed connections to Bronze Age civilizations overseas. Modern archaeology does not support those ideas. There is no credible evidence of ancient Old World civilizations mining copper around Lake Superior, but the persistence of such theories reveals how surprising the mining operations appeared, even to professional researchers. The reality is likely more complex and more human. Copper artifacts may have been recycled repeatedly over generations. Many objects were small, ceremonial, or buried in locations not yet discovered. Organic materials associated with copper use disappeared over time. Entire settlements vanished beneath forests, farmland, and modern development long before systematic archaeology began. It is also possible that ancient populations in the region were larger and more interconnected than older models once assumed. What remains undeniable is that prehistoric people around Lake Superior possessed remarkable practical knowledge of geology, mining, transportation, and craftsmanship. Some mining pits followed copper veins deep into bedrock. Workers used controlled fire to crack stone surfaces before striking them with hammerstones. Massive chunks of copper, weighing hundreds or even thousands of pounds, were sometimes partially removed and abandoned, likely because moving them became too difficult. In one famous case, miners attempted to extract a giant copper mass estimated to weigh several tons before eventually giving up. Standing near these ancient pits today creates an unusual feeling because the sites feel strangely industrial despite their age. Broken hammerstones scatter across the forest floor. Trenches cut through rocky ridges. Water pools inside abandoned excavations, now surrounded by trees that grew centuries after the miners disappeared. Without context, some locations almost resemble forgotten 19th-century work sites, rather than places active thousands of years earlier. The people responsible are often associated with what archaeologists call the old copper culture, though the term can oversimplify a much broader and evolving set of societies spread across the Great Lakes region over long periods of time. These communities lived during a transitional era when some groups still relied heavily on hunting, fishing, and gathering, while gradually developing more complex trade systems and regional interaction networks. Copper objects from this period varied dramatically. Some were clearly practical tools designed for everyday survival. Others appear ceremonial, carefully shaped into decorative forms with no obvious functional purpose. This distinction matters because it suggests copper held social and symbolic value beyond simple utility. Like gold or silver in later civilizations, copper may have carried status, spiritual meaning, or political significance tied to control of rare materials. One reason the Lake Superior mystery remains so compelling is because ancient mining there does not fit comfortably into older stereotypes about prehistoric North America. Popular imagination often pictures small, isolated tribes living simple lives disconnected from large-scale industry or trade. But the evidence around the Great Lakes reveals societies capable of organizing labor, transporting heavy materials, navigating enormous distances, and maintaining exchange networks across huge territories. The more archaeologists investigate ancient North America, the more interconnected it begins to appear. Water played a major role in that connectivity. The Great Lakes themselves formed one of the largest freshwater transportation systems on the Earth. Canoes could move people and materials across extraordinary distances through lakes and river corridors, linking vast regions together. Even dangerous waters, like Lake Superior, became part of seasonal movement patterns. But the lake also carried enormous risks. Superior is infamous for sudden storms, freezing temperatures, and waves powerful enough to destroy modern ships. Ancient miners and traders crossing these waters would have needed deep environmental knowledge and careful timing to survive. There is something eerie about imagining copper traveling silently across dark northern waters in birch bark canoes beneath skies filled with northern lights and winter storms. The environment itself shaped the rhythm of life around the mines. Winters were brutal. Ice sealed coastlines for months. Summers were short but productive. Fish runs, forests, and lake resources supported populations capable of sustaining mining activity over long periods. Yet eventually, much of the large-scale copper extraction declined. Archaeologists still debate exactly why. Changes in trade patterns, climate shifts, migration, evolving technologies, or social transformation may all have contributed. By the time Europeans arrived centuries later, many ancient mining sites had already been abandoned for generations. Forests slowly reclaimed the pits, while memory of the old operations faded into oral traditions and scattered stories. When industrial miners reached the region during the 19th century, they occasionally stumbled upon ancient hammerstones buried beneath layers of soil near fresh excavations. Some early reports describe miners finding prehistoric tools far underground, in places untouched for centuries. Imagine the shock of realizing someone had already been working these copper deposits, thousands of years before modern industry arrived. In certain cases, industrial operations unknowingly destroyed archaeological evidence before anyone understood its importance. Entire ancient sites may have disappeared beneath later mining expansion. What survives today may represent only a fraction of the original landscape, and there is still much researchers do not fully understand. Archaeologists continue debating how organized the mining operations truly were. Did specific groups control major copper sources? Were seasonal workers gathering for extraction efforts tied to ritual calendars or trade gatherings? How much social hierarchy existed within these communities? The archaeological record provides clues, but certainty remains difficult because organic structures, written records, and many settlement sites vanished long ago. There are also unresolved questions about how ancient people viewed the copper itself. In many indigenous traditions, certain stones, metals, and natural formations carried spiritual significance rather than existing merely as resources to exploit. Mining may have involved ceremonial practices now impossible to reconstruct completely. Modern industrial society often separates economics from spirituality, but ancient cultures frequently blended practical survival with sacred meaning in ways that can be difficult for archaeologists to interpret today. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of the Lake Superior mines is how quietly they challenge assumptions about the past. There are no giant pyramids here, no towering ruins visible from miles away, just forests, rock, cold water, and thousands of forgotten pits scattered across the northern wilderness. Yet, beneath those quiet landscapes lies evidence of one of the oldest large-scale mining traditions in North America, a story of human ingenuity unfolding thousands of years before modern nations existed. And even now, many mysteries remain buried beneath the forests around Lake Superior. New archaeological surveys continue, uncovering overlooked sites. Chemical analysis traces copper artifacts across ancient trade routes. Improved dating methods refine timelines that once seemed uncertain. Every discovery adds another fragment to a picture still incomplete. Somewhere beneath the trees and stone ridges of the Great Lakes, there are likely more abandoned mines, more tools, and more evidence waiting to emerge from the earth again, reminding us that North America's forgotten past was far more connected, ambitious, and technologically skilled than earlier generations ever imagined. There are places in the American wilderness where people vanish so completely that it almost feels as if the landscape itself swallowed them. A hiker steps off a trail for a few minutes and is never seen again. A hunter disappears within sight of camp. A child wanders into the woods and leaves behind footprints that suddenly stop in impossible places. Search teams comb through mountains, forests, swamps, and deserts for days or even weeks, sometimes finding nothing at all. No clothing, no tracks, no clear explanation. In a country filled with enormous national parks, endless forests, isolated canyons, and brutal weather systems, disappearances are statistically inevitable. Yet, certain cases linger in public memory because they resist simple answers. The deeper people look into these stories, the more they reveal not only the danger of the wilderness, but something unsettling about how fragile humans become once modern civilization disappears behind the trees. In Alaska alone, there are regions so remote that a person can travel for days without encountering another human being. Vast mountain ranges, glacial valleys, dense forests, and freezing rivers create some of the harshest survival conditions on Earth. If someone becomes injured, lost, or trapped by weather, rescue can become nearly impossible within hours. Yet many disappearances across the American wilderness involve details that feel strangely disorienting even when practical explanations exist. Search dogs lose scent trails abruptly. Experienced outdoorsmen vanish in terrain they know well. Clothing and personal belongings appear miles from where investigators expected them to be. Sometimes, remains are discovered in locations previously searched multiple times. Most experts caution against turning these cases into supernatural mysteries because nature alone can produce outcomes that seem almost impossible to urban minds. But the emotional impact of these stories remains powerful because wilderness behaves but differently than people expect. One reason disappearances become so confusing is that humans are surprisingly poor at navigating natural environments under stress. Studies show lost people often walk in circles without realizing it, especially in forests or uneven terrain, lacking clear landmarks. Panic changes decision rapidly. Exhaustion, dehydration, cold exposure, injury, and fear distort perception. A person who believes they are traveling downhill towards safety may unknowingly move deeper into danger. In mountains or forests, visibility can collapse within minutes due to fog, snow, darkness, or heavy vegetation. Distances become deceptive. Sounds echo strangely. Entire search areas can hide bodies or evidence in ways that feel almost impossible until rescuers experience the terrain themselves. The Appalachian region in the eastern United States has generated wilderness stories for centuries, partly because of its geography. The mountains are ancient, heavily forested, and filled with hollows, caves, ravines, and isolated valleys where visibility disappears almost immediately once someone leaves a trail. Long before modern roads, settlers moving through Appalachia described the forests as psychologically overwhelming. Dense fog rolled between ridges while unfamiliar animal sounds echoed at night. Even experienced hunters occasionally became disoriented in terrain they thought they understood. Today, large portions of the Appalachian Trail remain surprisingly remote despite passing through populated states. Hikers often underestimate how quickly weather conditions can turn dangerous. Hypothermia can develop, even in temperatures above freezing. If clothing becomes wet and wind increases, the human body begins making irrational decisions. Once exposure affects brain function, some lost individuals remove clothing, paradoxically, as confusion deepens, creating scenes rescuers later struggle to interpret logically. In the deserts of the Southwest, the danger changes completely. Heat becomes invisible violence. A person can begin hiking under comfortable morning temperatures and face lethal conditions by afternoon. Water loss affects judgment long before collapse occurs. Distances across open landscapes appear shorter than they really are, especially under mirage-like heat distortion. Search helicopters may pass directly over missing people hidden among rocks, canyon shadows, or vegetation without seeing them. In places like Death Valley or remote Arizona deserts, survival often depends on decisions made within the first hour after becoming lost. One wrong turn into a dry wash or side canyon can separate someone from roads permanently. Yet, what makes wilderness disappearances so psychologically gripping is not simply the danger itself, it is the silence left behind. In cities, accidents usually leave witnesses, cameras, traffic, digital records. In the wilderness, events can unfold with nobody nearby at all. A person may disappear into terrain larger than entire states while leaving almost no evidence, beyond a few footprints or abandoned gear. Search teams then confront landscapes that actively erase clues through weather, animals, water movement, or vegetation growth. Time becomes critical immediately. Rain destroys tracks. Rivers shift objects downstream. Snow buries evidence. Scavengers scatter remains. In some cases, people are eventually found only a short distance from trails or camps, hidden by terrain so effectively that rescuers walked past repeatedly without realizing it. National parks across the United States quietly manage thousands of search and rescue incidents every year. Most end successfully, but some cases remain unresolved for decades. Yosemite National Park, for example, contains cliffs, rivers, forests, and remote backcountry areas capable of hiding evidence indefinitely. The same landscapes that attract millions of visitors with beauty also create environments where mistakes become unforgiving very quickly. Rangers often emphasize that wilderness does not behave according to movie logic. Survival depends heavily on preparation, weather awareness, communication, and luck. Even highly skilled hikers sometimes underestimate terrain or overestimate their physical limits. Yet, alongside rational explanations, folklore inevitably grows. Across rural America, stories circulate about mysterious lights in forests, strange sounds in mountains, hidden creatures, or places locals avoid after dark. Most of these stories emerge naturally from generations of living near dangerous landscapes, where unexplained events occur from time to time. Human beings create narratives to give shape to uncertainty. When someone disappears without explanation, communities often fill the silence with theories reflecting local fears and imagination. In Appalachia, legends of hidden people in the woods or ghostly encounters blend with real histories of isolation and hardship. In the deserts, stories about lost mines, vanished travelers, and strange military activity feed similar patterns. The line between folklore and reality becomes blurred because wilderness already feels psychologically unfamiliar to modern society. Perhaps the most misunderstood aspect of wilderness disappearances is how quickly ordinary situations become fatal. A twisted ankle beside a steep ravine can immobilize someone completely. Falling temperatures overnight transform mild exposure into life-threatening hypothermia. Rivers rise unexpectedly after storms miles away. Dense fog eliminates orientation. A person attempting to shortcut back to camp may unknowingly cross terrain impossible to tour, retrace in darkness. Survival experts often say nature punishes small mistakes disproportionately because the margin for error shrinks so rapidly outside controlled environments. There are also cases where human factors likely play a role beyond accidents alone. Foul play, mental health crisis, voluntary disappearances, substance use, and criminal activity occasionally intersect with wilderness areas, complicating investigations further. Remote environments provide isolation that can both conceal crimes and attract people attempting to escape society entirely. Some missing persons cases eventually reveal explanations far less mysterious than public speculation originally imagined. Others remain unresolved because evidence simply never emerges. One particularly haunting feature of many disappearances is the way personal belongings are sometimes found separated from individuals themselves. Boots abandoned on trails, backpacks discovered near rivers, clothing folded strangely. To people unfamiliar with survival psychology, these scenes can appear deeply suspicious. Yet, extreme cold exposure, dehydration, head injuries, and panic can produce profoundly irrational behavior. Hypothermia especially affects cognitive function in bizarre ways. Victims may become confused, hide in small spaces, or remove clothing despite freezing temperatures because the nervous system begins malfunctioning. Wilderness medicine researchers have documented cases so strange they would sound fictional without scientific explanation. Technology has changed some aspects of survival while creating new problems in others. GPS devices, satellite communication, and emergency beacons save lives regularly. But many modern hikers also enter dangerous terrain, assuming phones will always function. Large portions of the American wilderness have no signal at all. Batteries fail in cold conditions. Digital maps can encourage overconfidence among people lacking traditional navigation skills. Search and rescue teams increasingly encounter individuals who ventured far beyond their abilities because technology created a false sense of security. And still, despite all the logical explanations, certain wilderness cases continue, disturbing people because they expose something deeper about the relationship between with humans and untamed landscapes. Modern American life creates the illusion that nearly every corner of the country is mapped, monitored, and controlled, but vast areas remain unpredictable and indifferent to human plans. Mountains, forests, deserts, and swamps operate according to physical laws that do not care about experience, confidence, or technology. Once someone disappears into those environments, the wilderness often gains an enormous advantage immediately. Perhaps that is why stories of missing hikers, hunters, and travelers continue gripping the American imagination. They reveal how thin civilization can feel once roads, lights, and communication vanish behind us. Somewhere beyond the edges of trails and campsites, there are still enormous stretches of land where storms erase footprints overnight, where forests absorb sound completely, and where human beings can disappear with terrifying speed into silence that existed long before modern history began. For centuries, men crossed deserts, mountains, and endless plains, searching for cities that almost certainly never existed. They marched through landscapes so vast and unforgiving that entire expeditions vanished into them, driven by rumors of kingdoms overflowing with gold somewhere beyond the horizon. What makes the story so fascinating is not simply that people believed these legends, but how powerfully those beliefs reshaped the history of North America itself. Maps changed because of them. Empires spent fortunes chasing them. Indigenous communities were devastated by the obsession surrounding them. And even after repeated failures, the dream of hidden golden cities refused to die. Somewhere in the American Southwest, people insisted there had to be wealth beyond imagination, waiting to be discovered. One of the earliest and most influential legends involved the so-called 7 Cities of Gold. According to stories spreading through Spanish colonial networks during the 1500s, somewhere north of Mexico existed wealthy cities filled with treasure, precious metals, and advanced civilizations richer than anything Europeans had yet encountered in North America. These rumors grew partly from earlier myths carried across the Atlantic from medieval Europe, where stories already circulated about lost Christian kingdoms hidden beyond the known world. Once Spain conquered the Aztec Empire and witnessed enormous wealth in central Mexico, the possibility of even richer northern kingdoms suddenly seemed believable. In the minds of conquistadors, the unknown lands beyond the desert became filled with endless possibility. Gold had already transformed the Spanish Empire once. Why could it not happen again? The problem was that information moved slowly and unreliably across enormous distances. Explorers depended heavily on rumors, translations, misunderstood conversations, and exaggerations carried between cultures with entirely different worldviews. Small details became distorted repeatedly. A distant settlement, described as prosperous, might become a golden city after several retellings. Decorative metal objects could be interpreted as proof of vast mineral wealth. European imagination did the rest. Perhaps no expedition captures this obsession more clearly than the journey of Francisco Vázquez de Coronado in the early 1540s. Coronado led one of the largest European expeditions ever assembled in North America at that time. Hundreds of soldiers, indigenous allies, livestock, priests, and laborers traveled north from Mexico into lands that were still largely unknown to Europeans. Their target was a legendary place called Sela, described in some accounts as a wealthy city filled with riches. The reality they encountered was very different. After crossing brutal deserts and difficult terrain, Coronado's forces eventually reached settlements built by Pueblo peoples in what is now the American Southwest. Instead of golden cities, they found communities made from stone and adobe rising from the desert landscape. To the Spanish, the settlements appeared disappointing because they lacked the vast treasure they expected. Yet, from another perspective, the irony is striking. The Pueblo societies they encountered were themselves highly sophisticated desert civilizations adapted to harsh environments through engineering, trade, architecture, and agriculture. But the conquistadors were too blinded by expectations of gold to fully recognize what stood before them. The expedition continued anyway, because the dream kept moving farther away. New rumors emerged about another wealthy kingdom called Keda, supposedly lying somewhere beyond the plains to the northeast. Guides described rich lands filled with resources. Once again, Coronado pushed onward into unfamiliar territory. His expedition crossed enormous portions of what are now Texas, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Kansas, searching for wealth that remained permanently out of reach. By the time they finally reached settlements believed to be associated with Guida, the Spanish discovered no golden empire waiting for them. Instead, they encountered indigenous communities living in grassland regions far from the fantasies driving the expedition. Coronado eventually returned south, having failed to find the cities that justified the enormous cost and suffering of the journey. Yet, even failure did not destroy the mythology. Stories of hidden riches simply evolved and relocated. Part of the reason these legends survived so stubbornly is because North America itself seemed almost impossibly large to early explorers. The continent stretched beyond known maps into landscapes Europeans struggled to comprehend. Deserts, canyons, forests, rivers, and mountains created the sense that entire worlds could remain hidden indefinitely, and occasionally, real discoveries reinforced that belief. Spanish explorers truly did encounter large settlements, complex trade networks, and unfamiliar cultures across the Southwest. From their perspective, if some wealthy civilizations existed, why not others farther north or deeper inland? The line between reality and fantasy became dangerously thin. There is also a psychological pattern visible in nearly every lost city legend throughout history. Human beings are drawn toward the idea that unimaginable wealth exists just beyond the edge of current knowledge. The harder environments become, the more valuable hidden treasure seems psychologically. Endless deserts encourage mirages, not only of water, but of possibility itself. In many ways, the golden cities represented hope, greed, desperation, religious ambition, and imperial fantasy, all combined together into one powerful myth. The consequences were enormous. Expeditions searching for legendary cities reshaped European exploration of North America. Routes established during these journeys later became trade corridors, colonial territories, and military pathways. Entire regions entered European maps because conquistadors were chasing rumors. Indigenous societies across the Southwest experienced violence, disease, forced labor, and political disruption tied directly to these expeditions. Myths about gold did not remain harmless stories. They altered real human lives across entire continents. Yet, what makes the story especially strange is how often legends grew from fragments of truth. In some cases, indigenous communities intentionally misdirected European explorers toward distant lands, partly to remove dangerous outsiders from local territories. Telling conquistadors that wealth existed far away could redirect violence somewhere else, temporarily. But each new direction only fueled the obsession further. A rumor became a map became an expedition. A failed expedition became proof that the real city must exist somewhere beyond the next horizon. Even centuries later, the Southwest continued generating stories about hidden mines and lost treasure. Tales of Spanish gold, buried in remote canyons, spread across Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. One famous legend involves the Lost Dutchman's gold mine, hidden somewhere within the Superstition Mountains of Arizona. According to the story, an enormously rich gold deposit was discovered and repeatedly lost, again, while mysterious debts surrounded attempts to relocate it. Historians debate how much of the tale connects to real mining history versus later embellishment, but the myth persists because the landscape itself encourages belief. The Superstition Mountains rise sharply from the desert, with jagged volcanic cliffs and deep, shadowed canyons that feel almost designed for legends. Searchers still enter the region today, convinced the mine exists somewhere beyond sight. Most return empty-handed. Some never return at all. The American frontier became filled with similar stories because unexplored land creates psychological space for hidden possibilities. Every canyon might conceal treasure. Every remote valley might contain ruins. During the 19th century, newspapers amplified these myths dramatically. Reports of lost mines, buried gold, abandoned Spanish missions, and hidden caches spread through mining camps and frontier towns with extraordinary speed. In many cases, people died pursuing stories that were likely exaggerated from the beginning. Yet occasionally, genuine mineral discoveries did occur unexpectedly, reinforcing the belief that legendary wealth could still be waiting somewhere undiscovered. The California gold rush itself almost felt like proof that impossible dreams sometimes came true. Suddenly, stories about hidden treasure no longer seemed entirely irrational. There is another layer to these legends that often goes unnoticed. Many lost city stories reveal more about the people searching than about the places themselves. European empires arriving in the Americas already carried expectations shaped by centuries of conquest, religion, greed, and myth-making. They interpreted unfamiliar landscapes through those assumptions. Wealth became the lens through which entire civilizations were judged. Places lacking gold were dismissed, even when they contained remarkable social, architectural, or agricultural sophistication. In that sense, the golden cities remained elusive, partly because the searchers misunderstood what they were actually seeing. Modern archaeology paints a very different picture of the ancient Southwest and Great Plains. Instead of hidden empires overflowing with treasure, researchers uncovered complex societies adapted brilliantly to difficult environments. Pueblo settlements, trade systems, ceremonial centers, irrigation networks, and cultural exchange routes reveal histories far richer than the simplistic myths of golden kingdoms. Yet, the legends still survive because they tap into something deeply human, the belief that beyond the known world, there is always one more hidden discovery capable of changing everything forever. Even now, standing in the deserts of New Mexico or Arizona at sunset, it is easy to understand why people believed impossible things here. Heat bends light across distant messes. Mountains appear and disappear through dust and haze. Ancient ruins emerge suddenly from canyon walls. The land feels enormous enough to hide entire civilizations beyond view. And somewhere between history and myth, the lost golden cities continue existing not as physical places, but as symbols of obsession itself. Reminders of how far human beings will travel, chasing the possibility that unimaginable wealth lies waiting just beyond the horizon. The Mississippi River does not feel like an ordinary river. It feels alive, in a way that unsettled people long before modern America existed. Stretching more than 2,000 meters across the continent, the Mississippi became the backbone of trade, migration, war, industry, and exploration, carrying entire civilizations along its currents for thousands of years. But beneath the muddy surface of the river lies another world almost nobody sees, one filled with collapsed towns, sunken steamboats, forgotten battlefields, ancient settlements, shifting channels, and layers of history buried beneath dark sediment. The Mississippi constantly destroys and recreates its own landscape. Islands appear and disappear. Entire forests vanish into the water. Towns wake up one morning to find the river moving closer every year until eventually the shoreline itself collapses beneath them. Unlike stone ruins preserved in deserts, history along the Mississippi rarely remains visible for long. The river consumes it. One of the strangest things about the Mississippi is that the modern river is not fixed in place at all. Over centuries, it has repeatedly changed course across massive distances, abandoning old channels and carving new ones through floodplains stretching across multiple states. Ancient maps quickly became useless because the river itself refused to stay still. Entire settlements built beside the water sometimes found themselves isolated miles away after the channel shifted. Others disappeared beneath floods or erosion. In some areas, archaeologists believe Native American mound sites, trading centers, and villages now lie deeply buried beneath layers of mud deposited over hundreds or thousands of years. The deeper researchers study the Mississippi Basin, the more it begins to resemble a gigantic archive hidden beneath sediment. One of the most haunting moments in the river's history occurred during the winter of 1811 and 1812, when a series of massive earthquakes struck near New Madrid, Missouri. The earthquakes were so powerful that witnesses reported the Mississippi briefly appearing to flow backward in certain locations as the land violently shifted. Forests collapsed into the river, entire sections of ground liquefied. New lakes formed almost overnight. Church bells reportedly rang as far away as Boston from the force of the tremors. At a time when much of the central United States remained sparsely populated, the earthquakes terrified communities across the frontier because the landscape itself suddenly became unstable. Even today, scientists continue studying the New Madrid seismic zone because the exact long-term behavior of the fault system remains uncertain. What makes the event especially eerie is how quickly nature erased much of the visible evidence. Afterward, rivers changed channels, sediment buried damaged areas, forests regrew over collapsed terrain. Yet beneath the surface, traces of drowned forests and altered landscapes still remain. Some historians believe small settlements and trading posts may have vanished so completely during the earthquakes and subsequent flooding that records of them barely survived at all. The Mississippi has always carried a strange relationship with disappearance. During the 19th century, steamboats transformed the river into one of the busiest transportation corridors in North America. Hundreds of vessels moved cotton, timber, passengers, livestock, and manufactured goods up and down the waterway. River towns exploded into existence almost overnight as commerce expanded westward. But the Mississippi was also brutally dangerous. Sandbars shifted constantly beneath the surface. Hidden snags and tire-submerged trees trapped in the mud could rip open wooden hulls within seconds. Dense fog swallowed navigation routes at night. Boiler explosions aboard steamboats became horrifyingly common due to high-pressure steam, systems operating under dangerous conditions. Some boats vanished during storms, without leaving survivors behind. Today, researchers believe thousands of wrecks may still rest beneath the river's muddy bottom. What makes these wrecks so difficult to study is the river itself. Visibility underwater is often nearly zero because of suspended sediment. Currents remain strong and unpredictable. Wrecks become buried rapidly beneath layers of mud and debris. Some are likely preserved remarkably well beneath oxygen-poor sediment, sealed away like time capsules. Others have been broken apart and scattered across shifting channels over generations. Sonar technology occasionally reveals outlines of sunken vessels hidden beneath the riverbed, but identifying them can be extremely difficult. In some places, drought conditions have temporarily exposed shipwrecks unseen for decades, almost as if the river briefly decided to reveal fragments of its memory before swallowing them again. During recent low-water events, remains of Civil War-era vessels emerged from the Mississippi near Baton Rouge and other locations, reminding people just how much history still lies beneath the surface. The Civil War itself left deep scars along the river. Control of the Mississippi became one of the central strategic goals of the conflict because whoever controlled the river controlled movement through the heart of the country. Battles erupted along its banks. Ironclad warships exchanged artillery fire across muddy channels. Entire towns were shelled, occupied, abandoned, or destroyed. Beneath modern cities and farmland along the river, archaeologists continue uncovering bullets, ship fragments, military camps, and forgotten fortifications tied to campaigns that reshaped American history. Yet, the river does not preserve battlefields neatly. Floods relocate artifacts constantly. Sediment buries evidence beneath layers that may sit dozens of feet underground. History sinks into the Mississippi and becomes physically absorbed into the landscape itself. Long before European arrival, the Mississippi already functioned as one of the great highways of ancient North America. Indigenous societies built enormous mound complexes and trade networks throughout the river basin. For centuries, goods moved up and down connected waterways, linking distant cultures together across huge regions. Copper from the Great Lakes, shells from the Gulf Coast, stone tools, ceremonial objects, and food resources circulated through river systems long before modern roads existed. The Mississippi was not a barrier dividing civilizations. It was the artery connecting them. Some archaeologists suspect there may still be ancient settlements buried beneath floodplain sediments far from current shorelines because the river's course has changed so dramatically over time. In certain areas, evidence of entire prehistoric landscapes now lies hidden below modern fields and wetlands. The river also shaped American mythology in unusual ways. Stories about river monsters, ghost ships, mysterious lights, and cursed stretches of water spread easily among steamboat crews and isolated river towns. The Mississippi at night could become deeply unsettling. Fog drifted across black water, while navigation lanterns flickered through darkness. Sandbars shifted silently beneath boats. Entire trees floated downstream like shadows. In a world before modern communication, disappearing along the river often meant disappearing completely. Bodies lost in the current might surface hundreds of miles away or never return at all. Towns along the Mississippi developed their own folklore, partly because the river constantly blurred the boundary between ordinary danger and something harder to explain. Emotionally, one particularly strange phenomenon associated with the lower Mississippi involves the river's ongoing struggle against geography itself. Near Louisiana, the Mississippi naturally wants to change course into the Atchafalaya River because that route provides a steeper, more efficient path toward the Gulf of Mexico. Left alone, many scientists believe the river would eventually abandon parts of its current channel entirely. To prevent this, the United States built massive control structures designed to force the river to remain where modern infrastructure depends on it. In other words, one of the largest engineering efforts in North America exists partly to stop the Mississippi from relocating itself. That ongoing battle between human control and natural force feels symbolic of the entire river's history. The Mississippi has never truly behaved according to human expectations for very long. Floods remain another source of mystery and destruction. Some flood events along the river became so enormous they permanently altered entire regions. The Great Mississippi Flood of 1927 displaced hundreds of thousands of people and submerged huge portions of the South beneath water. Towns vanished under muddy currents. Levees failed catastrophically. Survivors described endless inland seas where roads, homes, and fields disappeared beneath floodwater stretching to the horizon. Disasters like these reveal something essential about the Mississippi. Despite centuries of engineering, the river still operates on scales larger than human systems can fully control, and beneath all of it lies layer after layer of forgotten history. Sun-sunken ferries, steamboats filled with cargo, indigenous settlements buried beneath sediment, Civil War wreckage, forests drowned by earthquakes, towns erased by floods. Every floodplain and oxbow lake along the river potentially hides another story lost beneath mud and time. Unlike deserts, where ruins remain visible for centuries, the Mississippi buries its secrets quickly and deeply. The river remembers everything, but it rarely gives those memories back easily. Even now, archaeologists, divers, geologists, and historians continue uncovering fragments of what disappeared beneath the water. Sonar scans reveal strange structures beneath the riverbed. Droughts expose forgotten wrecks. Excavations uncover ancient trade goods miles from where modern maps would predict them. Every discovery reminds researchers how incomplete the story still is. Somewhere beneath the dark currents of the Mississippi, there are likely entire chapters of American history still hidden under layers of silt, waiting silently for the river to reveal them again. Deep in the deserts of Nevada, where dry lake beds stretch toward distant mountains, and the heat shimmers so violently that entire horizons seem to bend. There are regions of land the American government spent decades pretending did not exist. Roads disappear into restricted zones, guarded by warning signs and surveillance systems, hidden across empty valleys. Unmarked aircraft move silently above the desert at night. Entire facilities remain absent from ordinary maps for years at a time, and surrounding all of it is a level of secrecy so extreme that it transformed isolated, military testing grounds into some of the most famous mystery locations on Earth. The irony is that many of the strangest rumors surrounding these places emerged not because the government wanted attention, but because it tried so hard to prevent anyone from seeing what was actually happening there. During the Cold War, the United States entered a technological race unlike anything in human history. Speed, stealth, nuclear capability, reconnaissance, and aerospace engineering suddenly became matters tied directly to national survival. Secret weapons programs expanded rapidly across remote parts of the American West, because deserts offered something difficult to find elsewhere: enormous empty space. Nevada, Utah, New Mexico, and parts of California contained vast, unpopulated regions where aircraft could be tested far from cities and foreign observation. Dry climates also created ideal flying conditions while reducing corrosion on sensitive equipment. What looked like empty wasteland from the outside slowly became one of the most heavily classified landscapes in the world. Perhaps no place symbolizes this hidden world more than Area 51. Officially associated with the Nevada Test and Training Range, the site remained unacknowledged by the government for decades, despite being widely discussed in public culture. Located beside the dry Groom Lake bed north of Las Vegas, Area 51 became legendary because strange aircraft repeatedly appeared in its skies during periods when the public had no context for what they were seeing. In the 1950s and 1960s, pilots and civilians occasionally reported objects flying at altitudes or speeds that seemed impossible for known technology at the time. Many UFO stories associated with the region likely grew from classified military aircraft being mistaken for something non-human. One major example was the U-2 spy plane. Designed to fly at extremely high altitudes during the Cold War, the aircraft operated far above normal commercial traffic. Sunlight reflecting off its silver wings during twilight conditions created bizarre visual effects for observers unfamiliar with the technology. Government secrecy surrounding the project prevented ordinary explanations from being offered publicly, allowing speculation to spread unchecked. Later aircraft tested in the same region pushed perceptions even further. The A-12 Oxcart and SR-71 Blackbird reached speeds and altitudes so extreme that they sounded almost fictional during the 1960s. Pilots described seeing the curvature of the Earth while flying missions faster than rifle bullets. To people below, these aircraft often appeared as silent, dark shapes, moving unnaturally across the sky. Then came stealth technology. During the 1970s and 1980s, engineers began testing aircraft specifically designed to evade radar detection. Early stealth prototypes looked unlike anything civilians associated with normal aviation. Angular black shapes moved through desert skies under heavy secrecy, while military officials refused to discuss what witnesses observed. Under those conditions, alien rumors became almost inevitable, and in some ways, secrecy itself became part of the strategy. During the Cold War, allowing foreign intelligence agencies to remain uncertain about American aerospace capabilities carried obvious advantages. Yet, what makes the desert military sites especially fascinating is that beneath the UFO mythology lies a very real, hidden history of technological experimentation that genuinely changed the modern world. Satellites, reconnaissance systems, stealth aircraft, drone technologies, and advanced weapons programs all evolved partly within isolated desert facilities, shielded from public view. Some projects remained classified for decades after they were no longer operational. Others may still be unknown today. The Nevada desert also became the center of America's nuclear testing program during the 20th century. Beginning in the early 1950s, hundreds of nuclear detonations occurred at the Nevada test site northwest of Las Vegas. The explosions transformed the desert into a surreal landscape of craters, radiation zones, collapsed tunnels, and contaminated structures. Early atomic tests were conducted above ground, producing mushroom clouds visible from Las Vegas hotels more than 60 meters away. For a brief period, atomic explosions almost became part of American entertainment culture. Tourists gathered on rooftops to watch distant detonations light up the horizon at dawn. Casinos advertised atomic cocktails, while newspapers treated the tests as symbols of technological progress and national power. Looking back now, the atmosphere feels deeply unsettling because the long-term health risks were not fully understood or openly discussed at the time. Radiation drifted across parts of Nevada, Utah, and surrounding states. Communities, later known as downwinders, experienced elevated cancer rates, linked by many researchers to fallout exposure. Though debates over the full scale of harm continued for decades, entire military exercises were conducted near nuclear blasts as planners attempted to understand how soldiers might operate on future atomic battlefields. Troops witnessed detonations from trenches in the desert, while shock waves rolled across the landscape. The psychological effect must have been extraordinary, watching weapons capable of destroying cities tested in near silence beneath open skies. Underground nuclear tests later replaced many atmospheric detonations, but they carried their own mysteries. Massive explosions buried deep beneath the desert occasionally caused the ground itself to collapse afterward, forming giant subsidence craters visible from the air. In some areas, radioactive materials remain trapped underground within sealed test cavities, created by temperatures hotter than the surface of the sun. Even now, parts of the Nevada desert remain contaminated from experiments conducted generations ago. There are places where nothing visible immediately suggests danger, yet invisible radioactive particles still linger in the soil. Another layer of secrecy emerged around military aviation accidents. During periods of intense Cold War testing, experimental aircraft occasionally crashed in remote deserts under highly classified circumstances. Recovery teams moved quickly to secure debris before civilians could approach crash sites. In some cases, witnesses reported seeing strange wreckage hauled away under military guard, further feeding rumors about extraterrestrial technology. The famous Roswell incident of 1947 became one of the most influential examples. While conspiracy theories about alien spacecraft dominate popular culture, most historians and military researchers now believe the debris likely came from Project Mogul, a classified program using high-altitude balloons to monitor Soviet nuclear tests acoustically. But because the project itself was secret, official explanations shifted repeatedly, creating decades of public distrust and speculation. The desert amplified all of this. Psychologically, the American Southwest already feels isolated and otherworldly under normal conditions. Endless dry lake beds, abandoned mining towns, volcanic mountains, and military warning signs create landscapes that naturally invite imagination. At night, lights move silently across skies, with almost no background noise or urban distraction. Heat distortions create optical illusions during the day. Distance becomes difficult to judge. It is easy to understand how secrecy, combined with unfamiliar technology, transformed the Chaco region into fertile ground for myths about hidden bases and non-human visitors. Yet, some of the strangest stories connected to desert military sites involve entirely human realities. During the Cold War, the government built secret facilities so isolated that workers were sometimes flown in daily on unmarked aircraft from Las Vegas, without even telling family members where they worked. Entire careers unfolded inside compartmentalized programs where employees understood only small portions of larger projects. Secrecy became a lifestyle. Even maps were manipulated. Satellite imagery was restricted. Certain mountains and valleys effectively disappeared from public awareness, despite sitting inside the continental United States. There is something unsettling about realizing how much infrastructure, experimentation, and history unfolded quietly inside landscapes most Americans considered empty wasteland. The deserts became laboratories, with a future was tested away from public view, and some experiments pushed far beyond aircraft. Biological weapons research, chemical testing, electronic warfare development, and surveillance technologies all intersected with remote military zones across the Southwest during various periods of the 20th century. Not every project succeeded. Some failed catastrophically. Others remained buried inside classified archives for decades before partial information emerged. In many cases, the public learned about programs only after technology became obsolete. What remains hidden today is impossible to measure accurately because secrecy itself leaves gaps in the historical record. Perhaps that uncertainty explains why fascination with these places never fades completely. People sense that parts of the story remain inaccessible. Beneath the conspiracy theories and exaggerated internet myths lies a real history of hidden technology, secret experimentation, and military ambition operating quietly across enormous stretches of desert. Somewhere beyond the warning signs and restricted airspace, there are still facilities, tunnels, test ranges, and archives connected to projects the public may not fully understand for years to come. And in the silence of the Nevada desert at night, where distant lights move over empty dry lake beds beneath cold stars, it becomes easier to understand how secrecy itself eventually became one of America's most enduring mysteries. Some mysteries do not survive because they are supernatural. They survive because time destroys evidence faster than human beings can understand it. Across the United States, there are stories that continue haunting historians, archaeologists, scientists, and ordinary people, not because they defy logic completely, but because the missing pieces may simply be gone forever. Entire settlements disappeared before detailed records existed. Landscapes changed. Fires erased archives. Rivers shifted. Witnesses died. And over generations, facts slowly dissolved into rumor until the line between history and myth became almost impossible to separate. What remains are fragments, a word carved into wood, a strange signal heard briefly through static, ruins buried beneath forests, unexplained lights crossing remote skies, bones discovered in places they should not be, and old stories passed quietly between people who no longer know exactly where the truth ends. One of the most famous examples is the lost colony of Roanoke. In the late 1500s, English settlers attempted to establish one of the first permanent colonies in North America on Roanoke Island, off the coast of present-day North Carolina. When the colony's governor, John White, returned from England after a delayed supply trip, he found the settlement abandoned. Houses had been dismantled carefully rather than destroyed violently. There were no bodies, no signs of battle. Most unsettling of all, the word Croatoan had been carved into a wooden post. That single clue became one of the most debated mysteries in early American history. The simplest explanation is also the one many historians consider most likely. The colonists may have integrated with nearby indigenous communities after facing starvation and isolation. Some archaeological evidence and oral histories suggest possible connections supporting this idea. Yet certainty remains elusive because the surviving records are incomplete and the physical evidence is limited. Roanoke became legendary partly because it captures a fear deeply embedded in early colonial Katie's America. The idea that entire groups of people could vanish into the wilderness and never return. The forests and coastlines of early America felt enormous and unknowable to Europeans, arriving from crowded cities and kingdoms overseas. The disappearance of the colony transformed that fear into myth almost immediately. Further north, another mystery continues to unsettle researchers for different reasons. In the forests of New Hampshire, during the 1960s, a woman named Betty and her husband Barney Hill reported one of the most famous alleged UFO encounters in American history. Driving home at night through isolated mountain roads, they claimed to witness strange lights following their vehicle before experiencing missing time and fragmented memories of being examined aboard an unknown craft. Their story became enormously influential in shaping modern alien abduction narratives. Skeptics argue the experience may have involved psychological stress, memory distortion, sleep-treated hallucinations, or cultural suggestion amplified later through hypnosis sessions. Others believe aspects of the account remain difficult to explain completely. Regardless of interpretation, the case reveals something fascinating about modern America itself. As technology advanced during the Cold War and the skies filled with satellites, experimental aircraft, and space exploration, older fears about unknown wilderness gradually merged with new anxieties about what might exist beyond Earth entirely. The mysteries evolved, but the emotional pattern remained similar. Americans continued looking into dark, unknown spaces and wondering what might be hidden there. Some mysteries involve sounds rather than sightings. Across parts of the United States, reports occasionally emerge describing strange, low-frequency hums heard by small groups of people, but not others nearby. Places like TA, New Mexico, became famous for residents describing a persistent deep vibration, sometimes called the TA hum. Scientists proposed multiple explanations involving industrial equipment, geological activity, hearing sensitivity, atmospheric conditions, or psychological reinforcement. But no single theory fully explains every reported case. What makes phenomena like this so intriguing is how they exist at the edge of perception itself. Human senses are imperfect and heavily influenced by expectation, environment, and neurological variation. Yet, when enough people report similar experiences, even scientists become reluctant to dismiss them entirely without investigation. America's vast geography allows these localized mysteries to develop almost like modern folklore. In remote places, unusual experiences spread quickly through communities while remaining difficult to verify scientifically. Then there are the mysteries buried physically beneath the landscape itself. Archaeologists increasingly suspect enormous portions of ancient North American history remain undiscovered because cities, ceremonial centers, roads, and settlements were built from materials far less durable than stone. Wood rots, earthworks erode, floodplains bury entire structures beneath layers of sediment. Forests reclaim abandoned landscapes astonishingly fast. New technologies like LAR scanning have already revealed previously unknown structures hidden beneath vegetation across parts of the Americas. In some regions, researchers suspect there may still be large archaeological sites waiting beneath modern cities, farmland, wetlands, or forests. The unsettling possibility is that entire chapters of history may have disappeared before anyone even knew they existed. One reason these unresolved mysteries endure is because American landscapes themselves constantly erase evidence. Hurricanes reshape coastlines. Wildfires destroy remote structures. Rivers consume towns. Earthquakes alter terrain. Deserts bury objects beneath sand. The continent is so geographically vast and environmentally diverse that some disappearances become effectively permanent once enough time passes. This is especially true in wilderness areas. Missing aircraft have vanished into mountain ranges and remained undiscovered for decades. Despite extensive searches, small settlements disappeared during floods or economic collapse, leaving almost no records behind. In Alaska alone, enormous stretches of terrain remain so remote that wreckage or human remains can stay hidden indefinitely beneath snowfields, forests, or glaciers. There are also mysteries tied to signals and communication. During the Cold War, strange radio transmissions occasionally triggered public panic because military secrecy prevented immediate explanations. Numbers stations broadcasting coded sequences across shortwave frequencies became legendary among radio enthusiasts. Most were almost certainly connected to espionage networks, but governments rarely confirmed details publicly. The silence surrounding them allowed rumors to grow. In many ways, secrecy itself creates mystery more effectively than fiction ever could. Once information becomes restricted or incomplete, people naturally begin constructing explanations to fill the gaps. This process shaped countless American mysteries throughout the 20th century. Yet some unresolved cases remain haunting precisely because they are ordinary. The disappearance of hikers, unsolved murders in isolated towns, unidentified bodies found without names, abandoned structures deep in forests. These stories linger because they remind people how much of life remains fragile and unfinished. Not every mystery hides a dramatic revelation. Sometimes answers disappear simply because evidence deteriorates faster than investigators can reach it. The emotional difficulty lies in accepting that uncertainty may be permanent. Human beings dislike incomplete stories. We instinctively search for patterns, conclusions, and explanations, even when reality refuses to provide them. America's mythology is filled with this tension between discovery and uncertainty. The nation often imagines itself as fully mapped, technologically advanced, and scientifically understandable. Yet beneath highways, deserts, forests, mountains, and rivers remain enormous spaces where history still feels unfinished. New archaeological discoveries continue rewriting accepted timelines. Government documents become declassified decades after events occurred. Environmental changes expose shipwrecks, fossils, and forgotten ruins unexpectedly. Every answer seems to create additional questions behind it. Perhaps the most unsettling realization is that some mysteries survive not because evidence is hidden, but because human memory itself is limited. Entire cultures, languages, ceremonies, and ways of understanding the world vanished before modern recording systems existed. Oral histories fragmented. Traditions merged or disappeared. Places changed names. By the time researchers arrived asking questions, many original answers were already gone. In that sense, mystery may not be an exception in history. It may be the natural condition of the past. Most human lives leave very little trace behind, and yet the search continues. Archaeologists keep digging through forgotten landscapes. Historians reopen old archives. Scientists study strange signals, geological anomalies, and unexplained patterns. Divers descend into dark rivers, searching for wreckage hidden beneath mud. Pilots scan remote mountain ranges for aircraft missing since the 1940s. Families continue looking for answers decades after disappearances no longer make national headlines. Something about uncertainty itself pulls people forward. Maybe because every unresolved mystery carries the possibility that the world is still larger and stranger than we fully understand. And perhaps that is why America's forgotten mysteries continue fascinating people generation after generation. Beneath the noise of modern life, there remains a quiet awareness that vast portions of the continent still hold unanswered questions hidden beneath forests, deserts, rivers, mountains, archives, and memory itself. Some of those questions may eventually be solved. Others may remain suspended permanently between history and imagination. But somewhere tonight, beyond the cities and highways, under dark skies, stretching across deserts and wilderness, older than the nation itself, there are still places where the past remains unfinished, waiting silently for someone to uncover one more piece of the story. Thank you for being here. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe. It means more than you know. Sleep well and be gentle with yourself tonight.